Tons of news to talk about today. I'm seeing this headline a lot, that gamers are rejecting the 8GB GPUs and buying the 16GB models. Tons more. This is first reported by Tech Power Up, but lots of follow-up articles by videocards.com and others. And I do want to make sure there's some nuance in this discussion, because all of this is coming from the sales at one store. This is Mind Factory in Germany. And while they're a big outlet, if you look at their sales that they've published previously, versus actual market research into what people are buying, it's very clear that these things don't actually line up. So while this is certainly interesting, again, this is an example of sample bias in statistics, which is that these statistics tell you what people buying GPUs at Mind Factory specifically are buying. But the people buying GPUs at Mind Factory are not necessarily representative of the entire PC gaming, and graphics card sales. And I think that's important to note. Now, I think this does mean that the people who I would assume are maybe more educated on GPUs than the just average person buying a gaming PC do seem to be rejecting the 8GB models. For example, the 5060 Ti 16GB model has sold in roughly a 16-to-1 ratio for the 16GB model versus the 8GB model. And they're saying that the 9060 XT, which also has a 16GB model and an 8GB model, selling 885 units to 30, that is a 30-to-1 ratio. So that is absolutely huge, but again, this is only representative of Mind Factory's sales. So I think it's really important to understand that the average person buying a graphics card is not necessarily that. So if I go to Best Buy and I search for gaming desktops and we sort by best selling, for some reason I guess we need to refresh the page, let's see what pops up, because I have a feeling it's going to give us a little bit of a different look at things. So the best selling gaming desktops at Best Buy right now, okay, an RTX 4060, which is an 8GB GPU, a 6500 XT, which is 4GB and an almost $800 system. People are buying garbage. Okay, here's a 5060 Ti 16GB build. Little expensive, but it's there. But then right after that, we do have a 5060 Ti 8GB build as one of the more popular ones. Okay, 5070 Ti, we got a 5060, another 8GB card. 4070s, 5060, there's another 8GB card there. So just another 5060 Ti 8GB here. So the thing that I think it's important to understand is just that the people buying graphics cards are often just buying an entire PC, and it's just, maybe whatever happens to look cool on the shelf at Best Buy or that kind of thing. It's not necessarily gonna be this. So while it's nice to think that maybe gamers are getting more educated on this and are making the better long-term decision, I'll want to see more than just Mind Factory sales to make a big distinction on this. Now, I'm unclear if the Steam hardware survey will give us split results for the 5060 Ti 8 and 16GB models. It would be nice if it did, but I have a feeling they might get lumped into the same category. So I'm not sure when or how we will be able to get metrics on this. Now, there's another thought process behind this too, which is, how much of this is kind of the plan all along? Like, is it really actually more of a goal to upsell people on the 16GB model and maybe kind of price anchor it? So it's unclear exactly where, what the strategy behind these 8GB models really was for AMD and NVIDIA. It certainly is something to follow. It's also possible that in regions where, a $50 difference between models is a lot more, like, as a percentage of your monthly income or whatever, that this, maybe in regions other than Germany, for example, this would be a bigger deal. Anyway, so just important to interpret these kinds of headlines responsibly when you think about, there's apparently a lot of people spending, $1,400 on an 8GB 5060 Ti gaming PC as one of the best sellers at Best Buy. Anyway, Although, is Best Buy even being honest about what's actually bestsellers versus we want this thing to sell, so let's put it on the best-selling list? Regardless of stats, there's all sorts of shenanigans that go on with marketing. Speaking of shenanigans, I'm trying to track whether the 5050 is available, so it's still listed at Newegg, but still listed out of stock, and as far as I can tell, it has not gone in stock. So again, I'll try to buy one of these whenever they actually are available. Maybe they're available in other regions, but I can't seem to find any in the United States. If I go somewhere like PC Part Picker and sort prices low to high, I see tons of models listed, but they're all listed as out of stock. So, I don't know, guys. We'll see when the 5050 is actually available. Now, in other interesting GPU-related news, I would encourage you to check out Hardware Unboxed new video today about the 9070 XT's fine wine from AMD. This is basically looking at AMD's 9070 XT performance now versus the performance at launch, specifically benched against the 5070 Ti, with the latest drivers for both and game updates for both. And it's showing that while both have improved, AMD has improved more. For the specific details, I encourage you to watch the video. However, this really does always trigger a debate on what exactly is AMD's fine wine. Is this really something to celebrate? Because in one sense, it's nice that your product is getting increased performance over time if you bought it at launch, but why didn't it have that full performance at launch? Is that just a sign that AMD's drivers aren't actually fully optimized when a product launches, and so you're getting maybe the performance that ideally you would have got at launch later, if things had actually been more ready to go out the gate? In other words, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. However, if you buy I just think you should always buy a product based on its performance at the time you're buying it and never have any expectation of improvements over time in order to justify that purchase, right? So in other words, my take on it is I don't really care either way. You should buy something based on how it performs at the time you're buying it and what its pricing looks like based on that. And if it happens to get better over time for whatever reason, that's all good news. Anyway, now speaking of performance and monitoring it, I thought this was interesting. So it looks like Steam itself has now updated its in-game performance monitor. It's for a long time just had an FPS counter available. But if you were using like a Steam Deck, for example, there was tons of performance metrics available that just using Steam on a normal desktop PC wasn't giving you access to. Now, this is actually very in-depth performance monitoring here for something that's just built into Steam that's now available. I haven't actually tried this out myself yet, but the post looks pretty cool. Now, you can customize how much of this you want to see, but it can even do things like separate out generated frames from frame generation versus the traditionally rendered frames. And all sorts of things, monitoring some CPU performance, GPU performance. You enable this by just going to your in-game Steam settings and looking at the overlay performance monitor. You can set a hotkey combination for enabling it, set text size, contrast, saturation, background, opacity, what types of metrics to show, all of that. Generally, this looks pretty cool, and I think, I haven't tested this yet, but if you're wondering, can I use this in non-Steam games? You can always add non-Steam games into Steam, as a link to get to through Steam, and then I think that usually does enable their kind of overlay features. Now, they do mention that for some older hardware or less common GPU or CPU hardware, it's possible that not as much information would be available as on the newer or more common GPUs. Also, if you're on a non-Windows platform and things like that, you might not have the full data set available. But overall, I think this is pretty cool. If I test it out and feel like it's worth it, I might even do a separate video on this, because I often get asked what software I use to monitor performance. And there's specific reasons why I use what I do, but I think for the average person, having something just built into Steam, for example, might be more convenient than having to download third-party software, etc. So this potentially looks pretty cool. The one thing I want out of most software like this that most of it doesn't have, which is one reason why I use MSI Afterburner specifically, is I like to be able to hit a hotkey to start an average FPS count and then hit another hotkey to stop it, whenever I want and have it update that average in real time as I go. As far as I can tell, this doesn't have that. A lot of other software just does its average over a certain specific set amount of time and that kind of thing. I like it to be a little more, just be able to do it in real time, hit a start and hit a stop, that kind of thing. Anyway, speaking of updates to software, AMD's FSR 4 is now confirmed to be coming to the PlayStation 5 Pro in 2026. And also there's been some discussions of RDNA 5, although it's probably going to be called UDNA, being designed through a partnership with Sony. So this is a further discussion of AMD's tight partnership with Sony for a lot of R&D, especially around machine learning and neural networks, that kind of thing. So there was a recent interview talking about Project Amethyst, that partnership between AMD and Sony, with a couple of interesting comments here. Again, I will link all my sources in the video description. One of them saying the algorithm they came up with could be implemented on current generation hardware. So the co-developed algorithm has already been released by AMD as part of FSR 4 on PC. And we're in the process of implementing it on PS5, and it will release next year on PS5 Pro. It's not a cut-down version of the algorithm. It's the full-fat version of the co-developed super resolution that we'll be releasing on PS5 Pro. Now, there's some different ways you could interpret this. At face value, it seems to be saying that the full-fat version of FSR 4, not a cut-down version, will be implemented on the PS5 Pro. And if you look at the PSSR that PS5 Pro launched with versus what FSR 4 is able to do on PC, it does look like FSR 4 is producing higher quality output. So that's a good thing. However, I feel like there's still a weird phrasing here because they also are mentioning that the co-developed algorithm has been released by AMD as part of FSR 4 on PC. Okay, so they're saying that there's a co-developed algorithm which is part of FSR 4. They're not saying that FSR 4 in its entirety in its release on PC is that co-developed algorithm. And and then they're saying it's not a cut-down version of the algorithm, it's the full-fat version of the co-developed super resolution. Okay, so a full-fat version of the co-developed super resolution, and it's, the co-developed algorithm is part of FSR 4. So I still feel like there's a little bit of potential here for there to still be a meaningful difference between FSR 4 and whatever this ends up being called when it releases on PS5 Pro, or potentially I'm reading too much into this. But either way, it sounds like something like FSR 4 will be available on PS5 Pro. A further comment on this Project Amethyst partnership saying this is not for proprietary technology. This is really trying to move the industry forward. Obviously, we want to use these technologies on our consoles, but these technologies are available to any of AMD's customers freely. Big chunks of RDNA 5, or whatever AMD ends up calling it. A lot of what we're seeing kind of behind the scenes is that it looks like the next GPU generation from AMD is probably going to be called UDNA, as they look at merging and removing the separation between CDNA and RDNA and moving to a more unified platform. Anyway, so Mark Cerny is calling it RDNA 5, but acknowledging that AMD might call it something else. Anyway, they're saying are coming out of the engineering I am doing on the project. So big chunks of the next AMD GPU hardware is coming out of the engineering that Mark Cerny is doing on the project. And again, this is coming out of trying to move things forward. There are no restrictions on the way any of it can be used. AMD is moving extremely quickly. What I'm trying to do is prepare for the next generation of consoles, so my time frame is multi-year here. Okay, so this is interesting because with all of this Project Amethyst discussion, I've seen a lot of comments and people kind of scared. Okay, so does the stuff developed here still make its way to PC or even to any kind of upcoming Microsoft console if Microsoft is still doing consoles? More on that in a minute. It's looking here like they're saying that this is just, they're looking at moving the platform forward, and it's not about making things proprietary. So that's interesting and I think encouraging. In general, I would really like for all of this machine learning acceleration to be a little bit more open and a little bit less proprietary. NVIDIA started a lot of this push, and I think everybody else is sort of moving to catch up, but NVIDIA has done it in a very proprietary way. There is some movement in making, machine learning acceleration a little more available through APIs to then accelerate on whatever kind of matrix acceleration cores your different GPU has. I would love it if we got to a place where, like, could DLSS just be accelerated on anybody who has an equivalent to a tensor core? Now, that doesn't feel like the kind of thing that NVIDIA would do. So if FSR moves into a more open state, where could FSR4 or some version of this be basically as good as DLSS and also run on any GPU? Because interestingly, FSR4 has not been compatible with NVIDIA hardware, for example, whereas previous FSR versions were. It would be nice if we got just to some sort of more open standard with all of this that anybody could use. But again, companies like to have their proprietary stuff, so we'll see what comes of it. Now, in PC gaming versus console gaming in general, this is certainly interesting. We're seeing Capcom publish that they've seen a 61% surge in revenue from Steam, while PlayStation revenue share has decreased. This is certainly interesting. In fact, I'm seeing when you dig into the details here, that PlayStation revenue for Capcom has actually dropped below 10%, and so was not even included in their big report because it was less than 10%. Whereas Steam has accounted for 42.1% of its entertainment business revenue separately. Anyway, it's pretty cool. So in general, I talk a lot about how a lot of development for games seems to target consoles as their primary platform. And then, porting to PC is just kind of something that happens elsewhere. Darren, I'm gonna have to call you back, man. I just keep getting calls here. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted by my phone ringing. Anyway, so it'd be cool if, PC starts to become more of the primary target for a lot of developers. At least that'd be cool for the PC space. Now, on that note, though, I haven't necessarily seen that Capcom's PC performance is particularly amazing. A huge amount of this increase in revenue was the amazing sales of Monster Hunter Wilds, which was not performing well on on PC at all, not even performing that great on consoles either, really. Which is why I thought this was kind of interesting. So apparently, Monster Hunter Wilds developers are going to host a talk about optimization at CES. Sorry, not CES, at CEDEC. And I was just like, really? Are they the ones to talk about optimization? I mean, they could talk about the struggles of optimization, apparently. But I looked into the details of this at CEDEC 2025. This is machine learning translated to English, by the way. There is a talk, Making Monster Hunter Wilds Run Smoothly. Have they done it yet? Guys, has this happened? When did this happen? Anyway, all about performance adjustments. Looking at the details, they're saying, in this session, we will introduce the performance tuning of Monster Hunter Wilds, what goals we set and what measures we took, with examples. In recent games, stable operation and high frame rates are more strongly required. However, to achieve this in a wide variety of environments, it is necessary to approach it from various angles. Monster Hunter Wilds was no exception and walked a thorny path. I would still say that they're in the weeds, if you ask me, but anyway. We have fought many battles to maintain stable operation while realizing the elements that make the game a selling point. We will unravel the history of how we settled the battlefield, where quality and performance are opposed. Anyway, they'll talk about CPU load, GPU load, memory usage, etc. I'm kind of interested in this talk just to figure out, are they going to explain what the heck went wrong? Because it seems like they're approaching it as if they fought the battle and won, but I'm not quite sure they're there yet, guys. Anyway, shifting to other console discussion, we've got Nintendo Switch 2 has likely sold more than 5 million units in June alone, which is very impressive. But again, when I still see people discussing record-setting sales for the Switch 2 compared to other consoles in their beginning months, it's important to note that most consoles sell out at launch. So how many it's able to sell and whether you set a record on that is largely due to how many can be supplied. So what'll be more interesting is once the early adopters have bought it, how do sales go from then on? Now, I was interested in the Switch 2. I do like handheld gaming, and my kids like a lot of the Nintendo games and stuff, so I was actually very interested in this, but I've decided not to buy one until they have an inevitable OLED version. Now, if you want more information on this, Monitors Unboxed has been doing some incredibly interesting testing on the display because it is looking like the Nintendo Switch 2's display, while being perfectly acceptable on a number of metrics, its response times are awful. So while it supports a 120 hertz display, it can't actually update its display fast enough for 120 hertz. Where completely going from gray to gray and clearing the image completely is actually at about 33.3 milliseconds, which I think is more in line with a 30 hertz, kind of update. Whereas I think 60 hertz would be 16.6 milliseconds and 120 hertz would then be half of that. So we're nowhere near what you need to actually take advantage of that display. Now, in general, this was my issue with the initial Switch, is I absolutely hated the LCD display. It was also my issue with Valve's first Steam Deck. I absolutely hated the LCD display. So now with the OLED version on the Steam Decks and the Switch, I think that these are much, much better devices. And so that's my issue with the Switch too, is like inevitably they need to have a better display. And so I think I'm just going to wait until they have one, and there'll be more software out by that point anyway. So that's where I'm at with things. I'm just going to wait because they're obviously going to have a better one. Now, there is some discussion whether a software update could improve this, because it doesn't seem like they're doing any kind of LCD overdrive, which can help with response times and potentially have a minor increase to power usage. I would love to see this as a toggleable option in the menus. So maybe they want to leave it how it is by default, but to give more advanced users a option in the menu system to enable overdrive with the acknowledgement that maybe you'll slightly reduce battery life or something. I think they should do that. But anyway, in other news, mass gaming layoffs at Microsoft have begun. Tons of cuts have already occurred. More are on the way. It's breaking news right now what exact games are being canceled, but there's definitely games being canceled. The latest I can find, published right before filming this, is that Microsoft is closing down The Initiative, which is one of the Xbox studios, with Perfect Dark being killed, as well as Everwild, and which I think is what Rare was working on, and whatever ZeniMax's new IP was, but also some other unannounced projects being canceled. Now, I'm kind of annoyed to see Perfect Dark being killed. I actually thought the trailer for Perfect Dark looked somewhat compelling. But, I mean, trailers don't necessarily mean anything. Sometimes you're essentially building like a fake little version of the game to show what your goal for the game is, but nothing to do with what the game was actually at, like in its development state. So I'm sure there's reasons behind the choices they're making. But in general, it's, I don't know. I want to know what ends up coming out of this whole Microsoft and Xbox shift that's happening. It seems like they're basically, they acquired so many studios that they're now just a massive publisher, and have to make decisions based on that as opposed to being more of like an actual gaming console business. And I don't know. I grew up with the original Xbox and Xbox 360. That was a lot of like my middle school and high school time. Like literally, like some of my best memories growing up are Halo LAN parties. And in general, Halo 2 on early Xbox Live. Like, that is some of my just treasured memories of childhood. Like, every birthday I had in middle school and high school was like a LAN party. We're all bringing over Xboxes and setting up all the TVs in my garage and buying way too much pizza and Mountain Dew, and nobody sleeps, and it's glorious. So, like, I know Halo's not getting canceled, but what is Halo going to be? What is its identity? How do you develop stuff like this? There will be an upcoming Halo WC 2025 where we'll hopefully at least figure out what's going on with that. But in general, I mean, I'm not going to have time in this video to talk much about this, but I will link this article from Ars Technica in the video description. And it's an interesting look at what's wrong with AAA games by looking specifically at the development process of the next Battlefield game and describing just budgets ballooning out of control, completely unrealistic targets for the game base. Basically talking about how they're looking at games like Fortnite and Call of Duty and how they get 100 million active users. Whereas, so apparently that's the target for the next Battlefield game. We're going to have 100 million active users, despite the I think highest player count in any Battlefield game ever was like 30 million active users. And then, budgets ballooning out of control as they try to develop all of this. Anyway, it's a huge, huge look at this, right? There's a lot here. I would say that it's a interesting read. And I'll just leave it in the video description as one of the articles here. Last thing I do want to mention is a couple of weeks ago, I reported that Nexus mods had changed owners, and there was some concern over what that might mean for the site. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is it business as usual? Now, there is a big change being discussed specifically regarding age verification being necessary for adult mods. And the reasoning behind this, though, to me doesn't seem to be that there's new owners. It seems to more to be trying to be in line with meeting UK and EU legality guidelines regarding this. Now, it's unclear at this point what that age verification will be, because there's the like, yes, I'm 18, which obviously all the non-18 people will just lie and click, versus like uploading some form of like government ID and whatnot. So there's a lot of ways this kind of thing can go. But anyway, it'll be interesting to monitor, there we go, the situation with Nexus mods. Because I know PC, a huge thing about PC gaming is the modding scene. And Nexus mods has become one of the pillars of that space. So interesting to see what will come of this change in ownership over there over time. Anyway, hopefully you guys found today's video useful and or interesting. Huge thank you to viewers, subscribers, channel members who clicked the join button to directly fund the channel financially. It's absolutely huge. By the way, I don't often talk about the bonuses for that. I don't like to paywall anything that's a completed video or anything like that, but as I work on the big like side-by-side graphics card reviews, I generally finish the side-by-side footage way before I've made bar graphs and actually filmed me talking about it. And I do upload that side-by-side footage as soon as it's ready. And it's also full in its entirety, whereas during an actual video review, I generally skip through it pretty quickly. So anyway, that's one of the things available as like extra content that doesn't make sense to publish on its own on the main channel, but is available as a thank you to members, that kind of thing. Anyway, hope all of you have an excellent day.